It is Monday, December 4th at 6 p.m. I'll call to order the Liquor Control Board meeting. Please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance led by Deputy Mayor Thomas Renner.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Jenny, we have 3 regular items. First up is approval for A&A Asian Market, second-class liquor license renewal, second-class tobacco endorsement renewal, and tobacco license renewal, all marked conditional.
Yes, so these are pending inspection.
Okay.
So we're waiting for a certificate of fitness, and then these licenses will be issued if you approve such.
Okay. Any questions from council?
Any concerns?
Okay. Any questions from members of the audience here or on Zoom? As a reminder, if you're on Zoom, you can use the chat or raise hand feature to be acknowledged. Okay, do I have a motion to approve the A&A Asian Market licenses on a conditional basis?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Charlie, second by Thomas. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. Up next is McKee's RMJ Enterprises with conditional renewals of first and third class liquor, outside consumption, restaurant license, entertainment permit, and sidewalk use plus winter use.
Yes, so this is a straight renewal, also conditional, waiting for the certificate of fitness to be issued, and no issues.
All right. Did you want to come up and speak? Please join us at the table. And then you can introduce yourself and then make your comment.
Thank you. Ryan Johnston, owner of McKee's Pub and Grill, Winooski. Thank you, councilors, for having me here this evening. The conditional issues with the permit are some minor electrical stuff. They had some painted outlets that have been there for 25 years and snuck through. So there's a few other small electrical needs that need to be done for the conditional permit to be released, and I think one fire extinguisher got missed in a normal certification in the basement, so we'll get that all squared away this week. The only thing I really wanted to talk about tonight while we had everybody here was the insurance issue for the sidewalk permits. So the town or city is currently looking for a $2 million additionally insured clause through our current insurance company. So one, when you have a lease with a landlord, Winooski being the landlord of this piece of sidewalk, we have a fee that we are paying towards usage of that area. No problem. In the city of Burlington, they currently have a $1 million additionally insured clause, which, as we all know, Burlington has some problems. There are shootings and stabbings and robberies and that kind of stuff, and they're only looking for $1 million. The $2 million is an additionally insured package on your insurance portfolio is upwards of $6,200 a year. So the $1 million is completely reasonable and understandable. We come with a $2 million liquor liability insurance policy, which in the event of one of my customers getting injured, or let's just say a trip or fall or something of that nature, it is my responsibility and my insurance's responsibility under that policy to cover that accident. So being an additionally insured person on my package, it really doesn't make that much sense. I mean, I understand that the city, from a city's insurance standpoint, is looking for that verbiage in the contract, but the $2 million is, I mean, it's kind of unreasonable for what we're using it for. We're paying for a year-round permit because we need it for one day, St. Patrick's Day, and then the rest of the wintertime it won't be under use. So we're okay with that. We'll eat that. We'll maintain it. We'll take care of it. We'll do everything that we're expected to do. But I would just like to start some discussion, because as I've talked to other business owners in Winooski, they're running into the same thing. As you know, this past year was pretty wet and soggy, so we didn't do a lot of business out on that patio. And when the weather wasn't wet and soggy, it wasn't really that nice out. So it's one of those things that I 100% understand the city's need. I'm trying to explain our need as a business owner. It is unbelievable how much money I've had to put into this place in the last year. It has nothing to do with the city, but just personal expenses and upkeep and refitting and just the growing pains of a new business, an existing business with new ownership. So I'm just looking to start that conversation and see if we can get to an amicable resolution, because at $6,500, I don't know if I even want to use it, and be liable for it, because when it happens, yes, it's very nice to have the outdoor space, and it's definitely an attractive thing to get customers in. But what happens is people sit outside, and now I got a whole back room that's unused. So it's kind of one of these like catch-22 things. Is like, well, yeah, we'll have a nice day, we'll go outside, and it's great. But now I have this other space that's not being used because everyone wants to sit outside. So just something I'd just like to throw my hat in the ring in. And like I said, I've had discussions with several other business owners that have been dealing with this, and I know they've expressed some concerns and things as well. And I just, if it's an insurance posture that they're saying this is what it has to be, I don't know that I'll use the space. So I'd like to use the space. I love this city. I love the vibe, and I love that people are enjoying it and having a great time and utilizing our facilities. And it's a lot of money. It's a lot of money for a small guy in a 1 square mile pond.
Well, thanks for coming to speak about it, Ryan. It's something that will be back on the agenda in the next month or two. And when it first came up, we did discuss that dollar amount, and hearing actually specific business owners' perspective is useful for when we revisit that discussion.
I think one thing that needs to be thrown into that discussion as well is that Vermont, not Winooski, is a very difficult place for restaurant bar owners because of the verbiage and wordage that has been written and kept in place since the 20s. Which I know the state legislature is discussing and talking about rewriting some of these policies. But the fact of the matter is, insurance companies don't want to insure us in the state of Vermont because the dram shop laws, which are so outdated, are not congruent with New York, Massachusetts, Maine, and New Hampshire, the places around us that have much broader and less liable policies. So that's just something to think about and throw out there too, So that's my 2 cents. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you for coming.
Appreciate it. Good. Thanks, Jenny.
Are there any questions, comments from council? Any other public comment? Okay, do I have a motion to approve the RMJ Enterprises license renewals conditional?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Thomas, second by Aurora. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. And then finally, we have Standing Stones Wine LLC tobacco license new.
Yes, so this is a new establishment in Winooski. Glad to have this establishment. Decided to add on tobacco from its original application, which just contained a second class.
All right. We had the owner in here recently. Any comments, questions? Any public comment? Okay, do I have a motion to approve Standing Stones Wine LLC tobacco license?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Aurora, second by Charlie. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. That is the end of our Liquor Control Board meeting. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
Motion by Thomas, second by Charlie. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. It is 6:10 PM. I will call to order the Winooski City Council meeting now. First up is agenda review. Any concerns about the order this evening?
No.
Okay. Next up is public comment. So if you're here for one of the items on tonight's agenda, perhaps the public hearing, or else, if you can hold for that, we take public comment during every agenda item. If you're here for something that's not on tonight's agenda, though, now would be the time to speak. Is anyone here for something not on tonight's agenda? Okay, I do see a hand in the Zoom participants.
Harry, whenever you're ready.
Hi, thank you. I am here a little bit about tonight's agenda, but I'm not sure if this is going to be discussed, so I just wanted to check in. I know that you're working on the budget right now, and I'm just curious if you could, since I don't quite understand the process that you use, if you could just tell me if you're going through the amounts of money that you've allocated for certain line items, or if it's just a general kind of discussion about the budget tonight.
General, we get more into the weeds during the department presentations. So like next week is community services, and then in January we'll have public safety, public works. Elaine, do you want to add to that?
I do, yeah. So Terry, if you have a specific question, you are welcome to address it to staff at budget@winooskivt.gov. Obviously, you might, want to be making a case publicly, and that's also welcome, of course. But if you wanted something specific explained to you in advance of a meeting, you're welcome to email us there.
No, I just really wanted to know, I guess I'm looking at some of the the budget priorities and the recommendations from the Winooski Alliance for Active Transportation. And it sounds like probably when DPW, I guess, is being discussed, that would be a good time for me to come and ask questions.
Sure, that would work. I am going to cover some of the information there, not a lot of the numbers, but certainly the types of investments. And it also might be useful for you to just ask those questions directly of John Rauscher by email first, or at budget@winooskivt.gov.
I think I'd actually rather do it in a public realm instead of privately like that. Just to make sure that I get an answer.
Well, okay, we would certainly answer regardless, but sure, of course, it's up to you if you want to do it in public or by email.
Okay, and then I just had one other quick question, and that was also related to Public Works, and that was that this year it appears that the line striping was not completed, and I'm assuming that's because of the weather. That was what John had said to me a few times, that the weather was holding it up. And so I'm curious about how that looks for the upcoming year. I understand that the budget you're discussing is 24-25, so I'm wondering if there's money in the budget next year for continuing the line striping, and also just in terms of what didn't get completed this year, what are we looking at for next? Like, have we already contracted with this contractor for next year? Are they finishing up what they didn't complete this year that was in the contract? Like, where are we at with that?
Right, so this year it is a fiscal year contract, and so they got started a little bit, and that wasn't for lack of trying. The public works director was on them almost weekly at some point. Where are you? Where are you? Where are you? And at some point, yes, but then we were up against weather even after they had started. So that's been a challenge. They're still under contract to finish that work for this fiscal year in the next calendar year. There is money in the same budgeted amount in next year's budget. We have our doubts whether they'll be able to actually deliver on that, but it is in the budget, and there's certainly other uses we could put that money to, even if that doesn't come through the way we want it to.
Would it be possible if they're not going to come through, would it be possible just to have city staff do some of that striping, particularly on Mallett's Bay Avenue, where cars just don't stop for pedestrians, even though there's signs there?
We don't, my understanding is we don't necessarily have that equipment, but John, he is on if you want to respond to that.
Yeah, happy to respond. So the expectation is that the line striping contractor is going to finish the remainder of all the city work next season. They roughly got done about 25% of the work that we had a contract for. So we'll be in discussions with them over the winter to make sure that we're on top of, their schedule queue. And, then if we think that that's going to slip, then we will definitely, talk with our city staff and see if, it makes more sense to have us do some of those crosswalks with, less resilient water-based paint versus, what the contractor was going to use, which is a more durable paint that would hopefully last 2 or 3 seasons. So that's really the issue. We don't want to do it because we would use a less durable paint material than the contractor.
Right, I understand that completely. However, the crosswalks on Mallett's Bay Avenue and by the school for that matter haven't been painted in years. And again, the bike lane that I've been coming to council for like 3 years now, asking about that bike lane on Center Street, it's just non-existent. And if we can't get the contractor to do it, can we at least get the city staff to do the bike lane on Center Street, which is like one of 2 bike lanes in the whole city, and also the crosswalks on Mallett's Bay Avenue so that people can cross safely, and the crosswalks by the school so the kids can cross safely. Like that, those are those specific things that I'm asking if we could, when the weather gets better, if city staff could just do those, even if it is with lesser quality paint, so that it gets done.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to jump in, but I mean, right now painting won't be happening until, June
I
at this point.
understand.
Right.
I understand that. So I'm asking if it could be done, if those 3 things could be a priority in June, whether the contractor does them or city staff does them.
Yeah, that's fair. And we've told the contractor those crosswalks are the priority. So, but yeah, no, fair point, Terry. We will make that a priority.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you, Terry.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else on Zoom that had public comment? Okay, we'll move on to the consent agenda. So we have our City Council and Liquor Control Board minutes from November 6th, payroll warrants from October and November, accounts payable from November, Vermont Community Foundation Equitable and Inclusive Communities Round 2 grant application, and the City Council legislative priorities. We discussed at our prior meeting. I made 3 edits that were requested by council, as well as 1 edit to special education funding, which was a request from our superintendent. Are there any questions, concerns from council on consent agenda?
No.
Okay, do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Thomas, second by Aurora. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay, council reports are next. Bryn, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. I don't really have anything to report at this time. We had a joint meeting with the Infrastructure Commission and the Finance Commission last month. Mayor, you can, since that Finance Commission was hosting infrastructure this past meeting, I'll leave that update to you. We don't have any specific agenda items for December, so it's likely that we won't have a meeting this month. Airport Commission has its regular meeting at 4 p.m. on Wednesday, the 6th. Regular agenda items will cover the noise exposure map, updates, sound insulation, etc. That's usually later on in the meeting. So if you want to skip the first half hour, 45 minutes, and then join later online or in person, that's usually where we tackle that in the agenda. And that's it.
Certainly. So coming up on our next city council meeting, hopefully we'll have 2 alternates to appoint for Inclusion and Belonging Commission, which will then have a fully it's not staffed, but have a full slate. Yeah, have a full commission, so that's very exciting. And we do meet in December, so our commission meeting for inclusion and belonging will be December 14th at 6 p.m. and that's over Zoom. Please feel free to come and join that. Safe, Healthy, Connected People did meet in November. It was rescheduled for 11/21. The meeting, the commission reviewed a draft for an invasive species management policy for the city parks. The goal of having this policy is not just to have that tangible way to manage invasive species, but that can be used to kind of guide folks looking for volunteer opportunities, working with local entities like Winooski Valley Parks District and institutions of higher ed that want to do research, and can be used to get grant funding with that goal of invasive species management. The commission was kind of the first stop, and one of the next ones is outreach to Abenaki leadership, and that the Abenaki land rights and use document was used throughout the policy. The commission also got an update on exploring the Winooski Parks District taking over ownership and management of Memorial Park. The commission was in favor of this option continuing to be investigated and getting more community input. I know that's come up to commission a couple times, or to council a couple times too. And the next Safe, Healthy, Connected People meeting will be on 12/12, unless there is another reschedule.
All right, thank you. I have a number of things. Following our last meeting, where we gave some direction to our housing and planning commissions related to priority housing, I had a meeting with our zoning administrator, housing initiative director, and the planning commission chair to clarify council guidance and discuss coordinating a joint housing and planning commission meeting, which at staff recommendation will likely be in February, to help them align on those efforts. The planning commission will meet again December 14th, and in January we'll return to meeting twice a month, second and fourth Thursdays at 6:30 p.m. via Zoom. Actually, you can come in person for that one, it's hybrid. I also shared that direction with the Housing Roundtable group that I meet with monthly, which includes area housing service providers and school district staff. That group has actually met twice over the past month to coordinate across agencies supporting residents living at 300 Main Street, whereas I think a year and a half ago, the landlord was planning to redevelop the property, displacing some residents. Those plans have resurfaced, so the group is working to ensure residents know their rights and have support in existing or new housing. I also followed up with with the Vermont Agency of Transportation. After our last meeting, they had mentioned that legislation related to the local match we have to contribute for the bridge project. I've reached out to some of our state legislators to talk later this week about how to navigate the legislation and find an avenue to reduce our contribution if possible. I also connected with the Burlington Mayor's Office to once again co-host a breakfast event for our shared state representation. I'll keep you posted as the date and location are set. Elaine and I had our quarterly meeting with the school board president and superintendent, where we discussed coordinating community outreach on our city and school budgets, likely to be over January and February. After some of the initial discussions and input are done, we'll have more to share and engage folks in for decision making at that time. Thank you, Thomas, for joining me, the superintendent and school board president, for our monthly In the World of Winooski show on Town Meeting TV. We did a short recording to explain the annual budgeting process to residents, which we will be sharing out. And then, as Councilor Oakley mentioned, Finance and Municipal Infrastructure Commissions held a joint meeting where our Public Works Director presented capital improvement planning, and the group gave some input, essentially in support of all of the priorities that staff had put into the plan. The Finance Commission will not meet in December or January. Thomas.
Thank you. Mostly just some thank yous. The mayor, Councilor Oakley, and myself kicked off our first council in your community chats. We're still working on that name. But we met with some residents at Monkey House. It was a really great way for us to just be in the community. We understand that this room and the Zoom isn't always convenient for everyone. We will be hosting another one of those. Aurora, Charlie, and myself, we will be at Scout on the 17th at 10 a.m. So looking forward to that. Hoping to see as many new faces there as we did at Monkey House. And also a big thank you to everyone who came out for Downtown Winooski's holiday pop-up. It was really successful. All of the business owners were really appreciative to see so many people coming into their businesses and enjoying not only just the pop-up shops, but the items that the businesses that we're hosting were having as well. So it was really great. It was a fun night. Bumped into Aurora. That was really nice. And last announcement from Downtown Winooski, bingo is happening tomorrow at Last Stop Sports Bar. So if you can swing by, again, this is a fundraiser for Downtown Winooski. So everything that they do for our city does cost money. And this is one of the ways that they are raising money to do all of the great events that they put on for us. Thanks.
All right, Charlie.
Mine's also pretty brief. The Winooski Housing Commission elected to postpone November's meeting until our December date, which is the 19th. We had some scheduling conflicts, as well as the commission waiting on approval for short-term rental language, which is coming up to us soon. Yeah, like I said, we'll be meeting on the 19th at 6 p.m.
All right, thank you. We will move on next to city updates.
So tonight kicks off fiscal year 2025 staff budget presentations. Please stick around for my presentation, ask questions, and provide input on how you think your tax dollars are spent or should be spent. You can send that input between meetings to budget@winooskivt.gov. For those of you new to the process, each year the city manager, that's me, and staff work together to create a budget that provides the same services currently offered to the community, adjusted for increasing wages, price, and growth in the city, and then we discuss other things that we need to be doing. These proposals use limited funding to provide the greatest benefit related to priorities set by a city council. The city council then decides what budget will be voted on by the community. Each year in March, on town meeting day, the community votes on the total budget and the taxes. For the full schedule, or just the total budget. For the full schedule of budget meetings and information, please visit winooskivt.gov/FY25. Annual winter parking ban reminder. That is, those reminders have gone out on all city channels that are electronic. And here, as a reminder, there is no overnight street parking from 2:30 a.m. to 6 a.m. in downtown Winooski from December 1st to March 31st. For everywhere else in Winooski, overnight winter parking bans are during winter storms and for snow removal where street parking is not allowed from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. To sign up for our winter parking ban alerts, text the word Winooski to 888-777 or register at nixle.com. That's NIXLE.com. For full details, please visit winooskivt.gov/parking. Related to that, our team is reminding everyone that overnight parking in the lot at the O'Brien Community Center is not allowed from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. That's true all year long. Also, please help the plowing and sidewalk team by making sure lawn ornaments, sports equipment, or other obstructions are not in the city right-of-way, as it is the homeowner's responsibility if damage from plowing occurs, and we don't want that to happen. And finally, Operation Fire Cuffs. The city of Winooski is happy to join 2023 Operation Fire Cuffs, their annual toy drive for the UVM Children's Hospital. Every year, this special tradition brings joy to children in need, and we encourage residents to donate. Donations can be made at the Winooski Fire Department, Monday through Thursday from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., and at Winooski City Hall, just behind me there's a box, from Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. until December 21st.
All right, thank you. We are finally on to our regular items. And so first up for discussion is a public hearing on Municipal Code Chapter 9. Chief Audie, would you like to give a brief summary for public attendees who maybe have not been following closely?
Good evening. Thanks for the invite. Tonight's public hearing is on Chapter 9, the housing. We've spent several months with the Housing Commission, coming back to council and obviously staff on updates to this chapter. It included several updates to definitions, and the bulk of the work was in garbage or rubbish removal parts of the ordinance. There was nothing taken out of the ordinance. It was just really a lot of clarifications in the definitions, trying to make it so people could advocate for themselves through understanding the definitions of different parts. And then again, we focused on the rubbish and garbage. We hear lots and lots of concerns with that. We think a lot about public buildings in the city of Winooski, and it's pretty easy, I say easy for lack of better words, for us to deal with a public building, if you will. When it's a private home, we lacked, in some cases, the authority to start to enforce the ordinance, and that's why we focused quite a bit in the garbage and rubbish. This will not be quick. These are tools. It doesn't change the resources available as far as people, but certainly it puts us on the road to improvements and addressing several of the concerns we hear year to year, and make us more efficient, and more importantly, allow people to advocate for themselves and hopefully not get into trouble.
Thank you for that. So at this time, I'd like to open the public hearing and invite anyone in attendance who would like to speak. Please come up to the microphone and introduce yourself, and you may make comment or ask question. For those of you who are attending on Zoom, I'll go through in person first, and then we'll move over there as well.
Good evening. My name is Michael Bryan. I'm a resident here. I'll be honest, I haven't read the revisions to, is it chapter 19? But
Chapter 9.
what's that?
Chapter 9.
Chapter 9. Well, that's close. But I do have a couple of questions, John, that maybe you can answer that I've heard over the course of different meetings I've been at. One is folks who are tenants who want to make complaints about landlords, but they don't know the process. They're afraid, especially, oh, hi, John. Especially new Americans who aren't sure how to go about it and are afraid of getting pushback or evicted by their landlords. Is there some way of doing an anonymous request for, to look at some, one thing came up, bed bugs or, things like that?
Absolutely, and it's a great point to bring up, so I appreciate it. Property complaint forms have historically been available. It's part of the education we are doing. I was just at a housing meeting on Saturday, so there's quite a bit of outreach that the teams are trying to do, and part of that is assuring that people understand that the property complaint forms are available. You don't have to put your name on them. It is helpful if there's questions. Staff, we don't go to said landlord or building owner and say, John Audie did this complaint. They're available here at City Hall to write if you don't have access to internet, that sort of thing. But having property complaints filled out is super important to the city for accountability reasons. Calling me at 8 at night, if it's an emergency, absolutely, call me whenever, right? But to try to be getting a property complaint when I may be off at a hockey game or whatever, so doing a property form, puts it into a system, comes to our public admin system through our channels, and it's logged. And I can now tell you how many of those a year I get. They're connected to each building. So there's a lot of accountability in filling those out.
Great. So that can be either online or here, pick up a form here?
That's correct.
Okay.
And if people have, difficulties with either of those, please reach out to city staff, and we will certainly, we'll always take a complaint by phone, but we may ask you or physically fill out the forms ourselves and get it submitted.
Great, thank you. The other, I heard you say a minute ago that it's difficult to enforce some of the things for private residences. What's some of the properties that, around the city that are run down, that really need some attention? Where's the boundary between what you can do, what folks, neighbors or other residents can do to get that on your radar?
So as we just said, really it starts with the property complaint, right? And typically people want to do the right thing, whether it's private or publicly owned, people want to do the right thing. But in some cases we find that there's struggles going on in the property, whether it's a bad relationship between said tenant and property owner. A property owner may not have the means. And what have been charged with balancing is the city resources. We took action on a piece of property recently, and it was upwards of $12,000 that, we expended. We will lien that property, but there is no owner that was, that we could hold accountable. So, it's not only people resources, it's available funds for us to take that, and because it's a legal action, we're taking someone's property, or we're enforcing some code that inevitably costs them money.
Yeah. So the form is for a neighbor to use for a single-family property down the street, or someone, any property is what you're
Any
saying?
complaint, that form should be, we encourage to get filled out. And again, if people are having problems with that, please call, and, or come to the window, and city staff will certainly assist with that.
Great, thanks, John. Thank you, council.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anyone else here wish to speak? Is anyone attending on Zoom wanting to make public comments on the Chapter 9 housing quality updates? Please use the chat or raise hand feature. Okay. Seeing no additional comment, I will now close the public hearing. We can move to then item B, where we can discuss and consider approving these amendments to Chapter 9. Are there any follow-up questions or comments from council? We've seen this a few times.
I'll just thank you. You heard what we said last time, and I feel like that's all incorporated in the new document, so it's great.
Okay. Well, hearing no concerns, would someone like to make a motion to approve the amendments to Municipal Code Chapter 9 housing?
So moved.
Second?
Motion by Aurora, second by Charlie. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you very much. Okay, we will move on to item C. This is on for discussion, the Walk Bike Master Plan draft presentation. Welcome, Eric, and
Jen.
Jen Conlon.
that's it, yes.
Thank you very much. So I will just do a quick introduction here and then turn it over to Jen to provide more information on this project. So tonight I'm pleased to introduce to you the City of Winooski's Walk Bike Master Plan. This is an effort that's been going on for the past calendar year. This was funded through the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission's Unified Planning Work Program, part of the Metropolitan Planning Organization, in FY 2023. The bulk of this plan kind of focuses on big picture elements related to walking and biking in the city. It really builds off the 2017 Transportation Master Plan, which was kind of the high overarching transportation document that referenced some walk-bike items. This plan really is basically the next step in that master plan process, where it really develops a master plan for walking and biking in the city. So it is intentionally, you'll see, not a lot of specific projects included in here, because the intent is really to be able to more specifically analyze and review the corridors and the existing facilities to make sure we can we can fit what needs to happen in those areas after further study specifically. So we did receive a lot of public comments, so we have a good idea of what people are asking about and talking about. This will kind of set the stage to build on those future planning efforts. So with that, as I mentioned, we have Jen Connolly from VHB, and I believe Elizabeth Sundberg as well. Is Drew here?
I don't see Drew. I do see
Okay.
Brian as well.
Oh, excellent. So yes, and Brian Davis from the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission is here as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jen to provide a presentation.
Good evening again. I'm Jen Conley from VHB. I'm excited. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly to allow time for questions. But feel free if you do need me to stop at any time. I'm happy to. Very quickly, first slide is just the project team. Again, it was between the city, the CCRPC, and VHB as the consultant. The process really started, it's a year-long process since we first kicked off, and as you can tell, we're at the end. We're presenting this to the City Council and wrapping it up this month. I want to stress the amount of community engagement that was involved with this project. There's a significant amount of engagement, attending in-person events, being available for office hours, doing interviews, and not to mention, most significantly, too, the online survey tool. We had a total of about 1,000 comments that came in between online and in person, about half and half between online and in person. And in addition, to try to get additional input, we put out surveys in a number of languages, tried shorter surveys if people thought it was daunting to fill out the larger surveys, collected a lot of input, very, very important in this. Again, just kind of giving you broad strokes, upper level, but what we did is we collected, there's been a lot of work that had been done in the city to come up with various plans. You know, you had your transportation master plan, you have a number of studies that have gone on. In addition to that generation of projects, we also then, through the community engagement, listened to what folks were saying. And I know you had a comment from someone earlier today on bike ped concerns. Really paid attention and created projects based on that engagement. So it was bringing forth projects that were already discussed or mentioned in other plans, and then really what came out through the public engagement. And we took those, and with the help of the advisory group and the project team, developed what that evaluation criteria would be to figure out how to prioritize these projects. What is the most important? What should we put our focus on? And so again, this is very small, so hard to dig into, but if you do have a chance and can look at that draft plan, improving equitable access was very important, improving safety for all users received points, and we were very particular in how we defined what those things were and what points that they got, and we tried to do that in an independent way, not make it subjective, make it based on very clear measurable criteria. And once we went and looked through that lens, our projects, which you can just see unranked on this screen, anything that is a dot is a point of a project, and anything that is, a line is more of the corridor-wide comment. I provide just a few overviews here of the GIS analysis. This is based on census tract to get at that equity piece. This next slide shows what the GIS analysis based on destinations, what walking and biking destinations are more important, say schools, for example, and those received higher weighting. And we just continued and went through a GIS layer analysis for each of our criteria. What that led us to is this prioritization of recommendations. And as Eric mentioned, this isn't to say that this is necessarily the order we'll be ticking these through, but these are the ones that I think if you had a choice between funding a certain study and another study, this gives the city some guidance as to what we heard was the most important based on those criteria and based on that input. The great news is the first one is Main Street. So many comments came through on Main Street, so it's wonderful. That project has already been studied, it's been designed, and it's about to go to construction. So that one's moving along the process well. And happy to answer questions. If you have questions of what's a piece of any of these projects as we go through. But what we did end up seeing, and I'll just mention briefly, is really a focus on priority corridors. There are a number of corridors, obviously, that are very important to people in the city and received the most comments. And like what happened on Main Street, following that process of doing that identification of a priority corridor, a scoping study to identify what can be done, what should be done, going into design, and then construction following that process is really the roadmap for the city to follow to get the most bang for their buck in infrastructure as they move along. However, there are a number of other short, smaller projects that are illustrated also in the prioritization of recommendations. So there are a number of shorter connection things, crossings, et cetera, that also got mentioned and are not as big and maybe daunting as a full corridor study. Then we have, again, this just shows if anyone does want to dig into how we weighted those based on the GIS results. One of the things I wanted to touch on is the citywide initiatives. As far as funding, because I know that conversation is happening tonight, mentioning here that funding the maintenance of walking and biking facilities is very important. The continued implementation of these projects, whether it's full corridor studies or individual. And one of the things we did get a lot of comments about were maintenance. Now, whether it was the striping that came up earlier and making sure to communicate those challenges, I think is important, and think about how to address those things, but also the snow plowing. It seemed like there was a lot of concern about the sidewalk plowing, and that the system exists, and here it is on the screen, but maybe it's not being communicated as well as it can be. So some of our recommendations are more around that communication and what those citywide initiatives should continue to be to get that message out a little more clearly. So then we get into implementation, and we try to identify here for each of these priorities what comes next. And as we know, for Main Street, for example, the construction is next. But for some of these things, really, we know there's a lot of needs that want to happen on some of these corridors. Some folks want a sidewalk, some folks want a bike lane. In some places, the right-of-way can't accommodate both, so the first study is that scoping study. So the implementation plan really gets into what is the next step, what order of magnitude is the cost going to be, and what are the potential funding sources, so that you really have that roadmap of what steps you can do to advance any of these different projects. This is also important as you do have development projects come in, or a repaving project, or anything to that effect, because you have at least here what you want to happen for that next step, and what you can refer to this as potential projects come up that can help you fund them. And that's it. The next thing will be to get the city council endorsement and finalize the plan.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I appreciate that this is like a roadmap built on existing plans, existing community input. No surprise to see Main Street top, as that was a top recommendation in previous planning. And I like the evaluation criteria that was used. I do have some thoughts about the implementation plan and timeline.
Okay.
But I want to hold off on that and see if there are any questions from council.
And if I may, real quick. So as we've done with past efforts like this, the initial discussion here with City Council is to get feedback, and the project team will make changes, corrections, discuss those changes, and we will bring a final plan back to you at a future date for consideration of adoption, approval, whatever, acceptance, however you want to phrase that, as we've done with past efforts. So there will be another opportunity to look at the document at a future date.
Thank you, Eric.
The question I have is around, so this is bike and pedestrian, but one of the things I thought a lot about is bike and pedestrian getting to our bus stops and accessing those in a safe and easy manner. I was wondering how that was kind of incorporated, because I noticed a mention of that, and I was just wondering if you could go in more detail.
Sure. One of the things that we found when we did the mapping for transit is that depending on what radius you put around the transit stops, it really ended up including most of the streets. So it wasn't really a good evaluation criteria, because it didn't really, I think it's, oh, I apologize. I think it's probably more important to look at that through the equity lens, so that you're hitting that population that is dependent on transit, perhaps. But we didn't find that to be as good of an evaluation criteria, just because there was, there are transit stops within a short walking distance to a lot of community.
Definitely. Okay. Thank you.
Bryn, I see your hand.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to commend you all on the amount of work you did and put into making this as accessible as possible for public input. It really is rather impressive, and I think the yard signs were really noticeable. The QR codes were a really smart approach. Of course, having translations was really necessary for our community, and I'm happy that you put in the effort to do all that as well. So thanks so much. Just want to really reiterate that it does take quite a bit of effort and time, of course, to go through and sort through all the comments that you do receive. So really appreciate that. And I do think this is going to be that much stronger for that effort that has gone into it in the front end. I had posed a question to Eric about when the final comments would be due. So it looks like this was reviewed by the Safe, Healthy, and Connected Commission, but was not something that was presented to the Infrastructure Commission. So I'm curious. I know you're eager to wrap this up, and I'm just curious what timeline, if any, there might be for the Infrastructure Commission to take a look.
Talked to Brian Davis with the RPC as the project manager, basically to see what the timeline is from under the contractual obligation for time and money available for that. So I don't know, Brian, if you have anything you want to share with that. I think also it's you know, if that's something that council wants to do, is to have this plan forwarded on to any of the commissions for their review. I think that's entirely up to your all's discretion, knowing that it may require some additional staff time to do the implementation, depending on what we have available in the budget.
So Mayor, I believe when we went through the strategies and priorities, there was the overlay of topics that we wanted to have between commissions. Perhaps you have that handy. I don't.
Document handy. This might take me a second. I print things really tiny font.
That's okay. But needless to say, while you're kind of looking that up, it is perhaps Brian or one of the project team members can articulate if there's any additional time for other than the review from public tonight from any of our other commissions to comment.
I'm happy to jump in. Thanks for the opportunity to present tonight. It's been great working with the city on this and VHB. Thanks to everyone, including all the Winooski residents, for their input. It looks like our contract between the city and RPC is set to expire at the end of the calendar year, but to extend that however much longer we think might be necessary is a pretty easy process. It does depend on the amount of budget that's left over for the consultant to make any significant changes, but I think they're all set to make any updates that we recommend. And then on our end, if we think that it will exceed the monies that are available, we can certainly take that on ourselves, but more time is fine.
Thank you.
This is something that we would want municipal infrastructure to weigh in on. I would be supportive if it was possible to squeeze in a meeting in December, with the caveat that their feedback would be for any like significant change. Like it's pretty well along already.
And I'll say to that point, just for reference, John Rauscher, Public Works Director, has been involved with this process as well. So I realize that's not the commission, but we have had municipal infrastructure. We've had discussions about the infrastructure piece with John's input along the way from the capital side, from what we're expecting for future public works projects as well. But depending on if there's a meeting scheduled for municipal infrastructure this month yet, it is potentially we could get on that agenda to have that discussion with them.
Should I follow up with you tomorrow, Elaine? Okay.
On the implementation plan table, and also thank you for all the work that you put into this. This is extensive. And maybe it's too early to have an answer to this question, but I appreciate the level of dollar signs to say how much something is likely going to cost. But is there any way to get actual dollar amount estimates instead of those signs? Because would love to do, of course, all of these things, but unfortunately, money always plays a part in what we're able to do.
Sure. We did include the ranges, which obviously, you know, the high cost, the $4 signs is more than $1 million. So that
Okay,
gives you
more
an
than $1
idea
million,
of
okay.
order of magnitude. The low cost is less than 50,000, so that you could get an idea for budgeting. I think some of the issue is in this recent environment that we're in, estimates are changing constantly, and you want this to be a document that continues to live on. So I think it's tough to get too specific.
Okay. That's fair.
In that vein, I find this timeline rather challenging. Eric, I'm curious if staff weighed in, like, there are 6 items occurring in the 0 to 2 year term while staff are engaged in the Main Street project, Bridge project, O'Brien Center, and Lot 7D. It feels like a lot to add that way. In the 2 to 5 year term, when the bridge project really gets going, now we have 5 additional things. So to me, these are all things we'd like to do. The idea that that could get done in 5 years, I think, is not feasible.
I think for some of the short-term projects, at least several of them involve other scoping studies. So it wouldn't necessarily be a staff effort. It would be something that we would seek additional funding either through the UPWP program again to do something similar to this. So, but yeah, I think the staff time component could be something that is a challenge, and you know, that's why these are our recommendations and not the final document.
Yeah, one of the other short-term projects, again, is to continue implementing what you're doing on East Allen, incorporating those recommendations. And some of that can be done as a part of a development project coming in. You know, there's a number of different things that, you know, you've done great work there. You can continue to do great work there in the short term. So we did try to be cognizant of that and not say you're going to do 7 scoping studies in 2 years, because we know the CCRPC probably won't fund that many scoping studies, and try to spread things out time-wise, but we certainly can revise as you recommend.
Charlie, did you have questions?
No.
Let me open it up to public comment. Is there anyone in the room that wants to make a comment, ask a question about the presentation? Anyone on Zoom? Okay. So there were two more items that I was surprised to see in here. One is, it sounds like this recommendation brings back the Weaver Street bike lane, which to my recollection was very poorly received in the community. And the second is realignment of East Spring Street, which when East Allen scoping was presented to council, council did not approve that recommendation.
So both of those things still gained significant interest in discussion. So on Weaver Street specifically, we suggested that it go for scoping, to really have someone dig into how much width is available, what are the alternatives, what are those trade-offs, and have the whole community be a part of that conversation, especially in light of what you tried and didn't work. But there is still quite an appetite for something in that corridor. So we didn't want to, again, you know, we weighted based on the criteria, and that's where it did fall on the list. Now, I obviously understand that there can be some reasons that some of these projects don't move forward, certainly.
And what about the East Spring Street?
I would have to look at that. I can tell you that East Spring Street also received a ton of interest. That was one of the places that we did get a lot of comments on it. And so, again, instead of recommending something in particular, we've recommended that for scoping, again, to identify what those differences.
Sorry, I'm talking about in the recommendation to move forward the additional East Allen scoping.
Oh, East Allen, I'm sorry.
Right, so there was,
Right.
when that was presented to council,
Mhm.
one of the options was to realign East Spring Street with East Allen.
Mhm.
We declined that
Mhm.
and approved the signalization.
Mhm.
But this document makes reference to the alternative that was not approved.
I apologize for that. I can look into that and see, why that got carried forward.
Okay. I see another hand. Oh, Bryn.
Yeah, thank you. I'll need you to refresh my memory, Eric or John, or any of the project team for that matter. Are we expecting a second study, accessibility audit, or report? And just curious if that's separate from this, if there's considerations where there's overlap, et cetera, and the timing of when that will be complete.
You're referring to the ADA accessibility plan? Is
Yes.
that correct, Counselor? John Rauscher, I think, can maybe speak to that. John, if you're on still?
Yep. Yep. So the ADA accessibility plan is a separate document. That's sort of it's more of a regulatory document versus this kind of planning effort document. So although it does have some sort of planning capital elements to it, because it'll basically inventory all of the street elements that have an ADA component and look to see if they are ADA compliant or not. And then you have to provide an inventory and cost when those are done. So we do have a draft version of that I have in hand, but it mainly looks at the ADA curb ramps. So I'm trying to build in some of the other like sidewalk pieces and things like that. So that should be on the website draft sometime this winter.
But I will just, so the council's aware, we did incorporate though what the CCRPC had identified in the ADA study. We did give weighting to expanding ADA accessible infrastructure and services. So we did give weighting to the projects that they had identified as part of our criteria.
Great. Thank you for confirming.
Mhm.
Eric, is there any specific feedback that would be useful?
I mean, I think what you've given so far is definitely useful. I think it's more a matter of if this is in the vein of the East Allen and East Spring Street component, if there's anything you think is inappropriate to include in here, or that you might want to see potentially reconsidered for a higher prioritization, things of that nature. But otherwise, I think the feedback that you've provided so far is what we're looking for.
Any qualms with the prioritization? Bryn, I see your hand.
Yeah, I just thought of another question. So this document really looks at current state. I'm curious if there's any aspects of this that is kind of forward thinking about, how we anticipate the city to change, especially as we look at Act 47 implementation within the very near future. Any other infrastructure changes? Obviously, the Main Street's already captured, the bridge is already captured, but any other elements, that we're anticipating changes down at the O'Brien Center, the construction of the hotel, et cetera. Is there anything about this that's forward thinking?
I don't know that anything as far as potential future development was incorporated, but the way we did do the criteria really looked at, even if you have a new population of people or something new that's changing, looking at what those key destinations are, again, schools, parks, and the community centers got points as well as those key locations. So it didn't really look at any other changes you're anticipating. If there's something we should be aware of, I suppose that would be good to know to see if it influences any of the recommendations here. But still, mostly thinking if you have a new employment center or if you have new residents, they still probably are going to the O'Brien Center and or the schools and or the park. Still some of the things that we did weight as important would continue to be weighted importantly.
Great, thank you.
Any final comments? Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll see you again in a while with the final. Okay, next up is on for discussion the town meeting TV budget presentation. Welcome, Megan and Jordan.
Hi.
We'll start. Hi. Oh, we've lost Elaine, but she'll be back, right?
Hopefully.
Yeah, I would imagine. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. Should we proceed apace?
Yeah, you want to introduce yourselves?
Yeah. Hi. For those of you who don't know, I'm Megan O'Rourke. I'm the co-director at CCTV, and I'm here with Jordan Mitchell, who is.
I'm Jordan Mitchell. I co-direct operations for Town Meeting TV, and yeah, thank you for having us.
I'm going to say you can go ahead and start speaking about your budget because Elaine has seen it.
Okay, great. So thank you for having us. We're here to present what is our fiscal year 24, your fiscal year 25 budget, and give a little bit of an overview of the last fiscal year. So last year, Town Meeting TV produced and supported 1,386 programs for our member communities, and 362 of these programs was municipal coverage. For here in Winooski, we produced 39 City Council and DRB Planning Commission meetings. Some other general programming that we had throughout the year included the Winooski School District ribbon cutting ceremony, Winooski's Memorial Day Parade and ceremony, the Burlington-Winooski Bridge Project public information meeting, and Winooski Pride. So the contract stipulates production of 3 meetings a month, or 36 a year, with at least one other general Winooski program. So we covered 108% of the budgeted number of programs, doing 39 out of 36 expected meetings for the year. Town Meeting TV is funded in large part by the cable subscribers of Comcast and Burlington Telecom, and municipal contributions help to cover other operating costs. This year, we are requesting an FY25 Winooski municipal contribution of $11,000 for general operating funds. This is a $1,000 increase from last year's contribution, and you can see past municipal request history on the website where the agenda is linked. So that's that. Secondly, we have an exciting update from the legislator that we're looking for your support, but we have your support on. So CCTV is a part of a statewide organization known as the Vermont Access Network, or VAN, and we've been working for the last several years to find a stable and permanent funding source for community media centers across the state. We've been successful in getting one-time bridge funding for a few years while we did some research, and now we're ready to bring a proposal for a permanent solution to the legislator. So with that, there is a bill that they are looking to bring to the legislature. And so to show support, I had emailed Christine asking for support for organizations to sign on. And I believe you all have already supported this. Christine mentioned she'd be incorporating this recommendation into some legislative priorities that the City Council will be sharing with state lawmakers ahead of the next legislative session. So thank you for your support with that. And then lastly, I want to thank Kate Hepner, one of our field producers, and Matthew Smith, who's the Town Meeting TV trustee for Winooski. He couldn't be here tonight, but thank you, Matthew. Just for your continued dedication and support of community media. So thank you for the continued partnership and for having us. Are there any questions?
Thank you. And I'll just point out for those who aren't already aware, the $1,000 contribution, we've been you note it here, but we've been in an agreement for some years with Town Meeting TV. We were paying less than whatever the requested amount, and so for several years we've been increasing at $1,000 a year until we catch up to what our other peer communities are set at. So appreciate that ongoing flexibility.
Yeah.
Do you folks have questions?
I have a question, more of a curiosity. I had been under the impression that you all were kind of the only game in town covering local meetings and whatnot, and recently we did a meeting with our friends up at the school and there was somebody else covering them. So I wonder, what do your outreach efforts look like to try to expand your market?
Well, let me first explain a little bit of that relationship. So, and just for folks' knowledge and edification, Jordan Mitchell, this is her first year starting as co-director at Town Meeting TV. So that's why I'm sitting here to help answer some questions. And I have moved from the job that Jordan has had up until now. I've moved to co-director of CCTV. And CCTV is sort of the parent organization that manages a variety of projects, including the access management organization, Town Meeting TV. And Vermont manages franchise fees, which is what provides cable access. And each of those cable access centers are referred to as an access management organization. And we have, we're lucky enough to have 24 different access management organizations. And interestingly enough, in Burlington, there are 2. So the Media Factory manages what used to be called Regional Education Television Network and VCAM Public Access. So the public and the educational channels are there, and they do educational access for all of Chittenden County. They also, just not to blow your mind and confuse you, but they also do some government access for Chittenden County South. So they cover meetings in Shelburne. And that we are the government access channel for Chittenden County North, but we're also a small g government access channel. We are required by our certificate of public good to provide some public access as well. Thus, our internships, our studio equipment that we're allowed to train other folks in the community to use. Yeah. So when you are at the school board meetings, those are being covered by the Media Factory. And it is somewhat confusing in a brand. It used to work fine when people were just watching on TV. Yeah. But now in the world of social media and branding, it is a little confusing. So hope that answers your question.
No, it does.
But we also do support, for the whole organization, CCTV has a marketing and outreach person who does some work also for Town Meeting TV. So for example, we'll excerpt your updates from today and Elaine's update from today, and that will be aired separately and also distributed on social media in its own separate, so that folks, you know, I say to people, like, if you want to learn something about your community, just watch 10 minutes. And like, just watch City Council for 10 minutes and you're going to learn something that's a way in that your mind's going to be blown about what people are doing. So, I mean, I just sat here, I was like, there were things that you were saying during that update, and now I can't remember what it was, but it was something when I was reading notes, like, oh, the election forums that are coming up and how we're gonna, like, you know, because you're gonna have, what is this, your second or third year doing non-resident voting? Yeah, so. Did that sort of answer the question?
It did, yeah. It's been one I have been wanting to ask since I witnessed that, so thank you.
Thank you for asking, yeah.
Are there other questions? Any questions from members of the public? Or folks attending via Zoom? Bryn?
Yeah, I know that we have a breakdown of how many meetings we get aired a month. Is there a summary of that? In terms of like what months we've not used the allocated allotment of, 3 meetings? Does it sugar out into like January where we have 4 council meetings? How does that kind of move around throughout the year?
Okay, so in my experience of working with you all, and it's Paul Sarn, right, who works really well to make sure you all are using your allocation. And so it does sugar out, like if there are only 2 meetings in 1 month, then there'll be 4 meetings likely used in the next month. I think you said 109%. So Winooski has 3 baseline meetings. So all of the communities that we cover, save Colchester, where we really only are covering a couple hundred homes, and we partner with yet another access center in Colchester, Lake Champlain Access Television. to do the meeting coverage. So the baseline coverage is 3 meetings per month. That's 36 meetings in the year. I think we covered 39. A few years back, we also decided to make an effort because we have a big pocket of general programming, and so we made an effort to make sure that we're covering we're trying to cover at least one general non-meeting event in the city as well. And so that's some of the programs that Jordan mentioned that aren't included in that 39 municipal meetings. So hopefully I'm answering your question. And if you ever want to see it, your municipal rep, Matthew, has access to those documents, and we keep a contract dashboard going on a month-to-month basis. So we detail all of that coverage for the whole, for all the community. So you can see that if you want through Matthew, or you can ask us to send it to you.
And Paul
Thank
does
you.
track that very carefully, and he responded to my text asking about it, that it's very rare that we miss our third allocation in a month or any of the three.
Oh.
Sorry, Brent, can you hear me okay? Counselor Oakley? Elaine was just reiterating that we very rarely miss a meeting. We almost always meet that, which is great.
Thank you, Paul.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Well, thank you for coming and presenting. This is built into the budget that is being presented to us as well. So we will take a future vote.
Great, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. And feel free always to reach out and, then come in and make some TV too. Because that's what we're here for.
Yeah, I host In the World of Winooski once a month,
Yeah.
and I don't have to. If you all have a guest or a topic you want to feature, I'm flexible.
Yeah, and we can come out to Winooski and do that with you too.
That's true, yeah,
Yeah.
in person,
Yeah,
on site.
thank you. Thanks.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
So before we move into the next item, which is the fiscal year 2025 budget presentation, I'm compelled to call a little break here. I've got 7:17 p.m. Let's reconvene at 7:23. It is 7:23. I will reconvene the meeting. We are on item E for discussion, the fiscal year 2025 budget presentation. Just for some table setting, this is our first introduction to this year's fiscal budget proposal from the city manager. We will deep dive into different sections over the next 6 meetings before actual decision making. So I would encourage you to focus on your questions, or thoughts or concerns you want to see addressed as we move forward in this process, since we're not at necessarily the decision-making stage yet. All right, take it away.
Okay, thank you. Give me 1 minute. Oh, interesting. Oh, there we go. Okay. So yes, tonight I am presenting the fiscal year 2024-2025 proposed budget. I'll provide an overview of all the funds and go into some detail about the general government departments. Note that I will be presenting 3 budget scenarios: the council-directed budget, my recommended budget, and an alternative budget. Thank you to council members who have already started asking your questions by email. Please feel free to ask any questions tonight also as we go. We might not answer them all today. For detailed questions related to community services, police, fire and code enforcement, public works, and capital improvement, I might have those department heads to answer those during their presentations in later weeks. To warn you, my presentation does take almost an hour to deliver without questions. That's not to discourage questions, just want you to be prepared. So the agenda for my presentation in a bit more detail. I'll remind everyone about the strategic vision context for the city and for this budget, review the budget process, review the general fund budget scenarios, including my proposed budget, review all the funds, and review what's next in the budget process. I'll review the general administration budget in detail, 2 of the funds in more detail that are managed by me, the city manager, and uncertainties that could impact the city's financial picture. A reminder that everything your city team has done and continues to do is guided by the strategic vision set by the community in 2015. These themes continue to be relevant today: municipal infrastructure, housing, economic vitality, and safe, healthy, connected people. A reminder on the budget process. In September, Council approved the budget timeline. In October, Council provided direction on your priorities. In bold is where we are tonight. In the next 4 council meetings, as the mayor was just saying, including January 16th, you'll hear from the bigger operational areas. That's community services, public works, public safety, and the capital improvement plan. In years past, the capital improvement plan was presented on the same night as public works, but because there's a lot of information to absorb on both, with council agreement, we separated those presentations this year. That means on January 16th, you'll be hearing of that and having your overall discussion on the budget. So that makes it extra important that you ask your questions as we go. Please send them to budget@winooskivt.gov. That email address can be used by the public as well, not just council members. By state law, we need to warn the budget vote 30 to 40 days in advance of the vote, which will be held on town meeting day. Town meeting day this year is on, or this coming cycle is March 5th. So staff need to have published notices of what's on the ballot, known as the warning, between January 25th and February 4th. Your scheduled meetings around this time are January 22nd and February 5th. So your schedule has you approving the budget and setting the warning during your January 22nd meeting. And I'm telling you all that because if you find you need more time before setting the budget, you do have the option to schedule another meeting as long as the budget and warning are set in enough time for staff to have the warning published before February 4th. Do also keep in mind that by state statute, early ballots can be available as early as 30 days before town meeting day. So setting the budget closer to 30 days before the vote will likely reduce the amount of time early voting is available, because we, of course, have to still get the final ballot printed. In February, there will be community presentations on the council-approved budget going to voters, including during a community dinner hosted by Winooski Partnership for Prevention. That's on February 19th. By city charter, there's a last presentation the day before the vote, so that's March 4th this year. That's held jointly with the school district and at the school. And finally, of course, town meeting day is March 5th, when people can vote in person by ballot for the school and city budgets, local offices, and other local matters. This year, that will include 2 city bond votes, only one of which has a financial impact into the future. A reminder that during your October 2nd, 2023 meeting, Council directed staff to develop a catch-up budget that updates costs for existing services and includes some increases to catch up on some deficiencies with an emphasis on municipal infrastructure. First, some context for who the budget pays for to provide what services. As a local government, we provide services to the general public that are basically too expensive for them to get on their own. For the most part, it takes people to deliver those services. This is an organizational chart showing how those people are organized by department or office. Everyone in the organization is accountable to Winooski residents and voters. They're at the top. And that community's role, our community's role, primarily is to set that vision for us. Council's role is to adopt plans, strategy, and policies to achieve that vision. The black box on the right is for advisory bodies. Their members are all appointed by City Council to formally advise you on plans, strategy, and policies. The green box at the bottom shows municipal service areas. And starting with the second one down, assessing, the way we raise money to pay for the services we provide the public is mostly through property taxes. The tax bill for a property is based on the value of that property, and it's the professional contracted assessor who determines the value of each property. Community services support the vitality of our community, providing green spaces, safe spaces, learning spaces, and programs. Fire and code enforcement protect our safety and health related to buildings and road hazards. Planning, zoning, and housing support a built environment that our community needs and wants. Police and dispatch support the safety of our community members. This department also enforces city parking regulations, which is about safety in most of Winooski and in the downtown, supports our economic vitality by ensuring parking spaces turn over for business customers. Public Works manages our streets, sidewalks, water, and wastewater services. And finally, back to the top of the green box, administration, that department makes all the other functions more effective. In the middle, just above that last green box, is the city manager, that's me. I support City Council in your efforts to guide the city and provide leadership, coordination, and support to all city departments. As City Manager, I am accountable for all activities of all staff. Because most of Winooski's government services are provided by people, most of the budget is for salaries, that's in lighter blue on the left, and benefits in orange at the top. Note that most of our employees are covered by multi-year union contracts, which set wage increases and dictate benefits. For those employees not covered by union contracts, it's better for retention to have wage increases and benefits that are similar to those in the union contracts. Now we'll go into the budget scenarios for the general fund, which is the fund that affects the tax rate. The general fund pays for general administration, fire and code enforcement, police, public works administration and staff, community services, and some capital costs related to the buildings for those people. So first, let me review the challenges and assumptions in each of the budget scenarios. Recall the portion of the budget that is wages and benefits. It was quite a bit. We used a 3.2 cost of living adjustment in fiscal year 2025 for all staff. Our two union contracts are based on the October to October Consumer Price Index change, so that was 3.2%. We use the same figure for non-union employees, as I mentioned earlier. It's not higher for fairness and not lower, so as not to create pay compression issues in the case of leadership team members. The new statewide tax that will fund childcare initiatives is also have to be reflected. The employer share will need to be included in budgets going forward. Health insurance, the city receives health insurance through Vermont Health Connect. Initial health insurance quotes for calendar year 2024 show an increase of 13.75% for Blue Cross Blue Shield premiums. That makes up 81% of the city's healthcare costs. We project a 13% increase for calendar year 2024 based on experience. The grand list is the total value of taxable property in the city. All things being equal, if there's more development, the grand list will increase. Note, existing buildings can also go down in value, of course, like due to a fire if they're not being maintained. So what matters for the grand list total is the net value across all taxable properties in the city. So an introduction, if you need one, why we talk about the grand list. The value of the grand list affects the tax rate like this. We start with the amount of money we need to provide municipal services, then we divide that by the grand list value to arrive at the tax rate. So if the grand list goes up, it offsets that much of the increase in the tax rate needed by the budget. The grand list is growing, but projected to grow more slowly. So we're projecting a modest increase of 0.5% growth in the grand list based on zoning and building permits issued, offset by expected value reductions. The net change to the grand list translates to approximately $38,239 to the good in new property tax revenue for the general fund. Grand list growth that will determine the actual tax base for the city won't be calculated until April 1st, 2024, and so could vary from this. Next, some long-term residents may have even been expecting a decrease in their tax bill this year because the tax increment finance district is expiring in May, meaning the tax revenues from the downtown redevelopment are freed up from the infrastructure improvement debt the city will have paid off and will now go to the general fund. However, most of that has been allocated by city councils in years past to meet priorities along the way. These are Main Street revitalization, community development funding, and community services staff this past year, or for this fiscal year. Other expenses from the revitalization are also continuing, like maintenance of downtown infrastructure and legal fees. And finally, for the purposes of this slide, we are projecting some reduction in revenues due to factors outside of our control, especially in recording related to property sales is down given high borrowing costs, and the plans review revenue we were attempting to make the case for with the state has been put on hold by the state. Still trying, but can't count on that.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that last phrase you said from the tax department.
Yeah, plans review, so it's a service that is currently provided by the state and by us locally. So there's other communities that actually receive some of that revenue that comes from reviewing plans for new development. The city of Winooski doesn't get any of that revenue now, so we've asked the state to share in some of that revenue. So this bar graph summarizes what's driving 5.44% of the tax rate change in any of our scenarios. That is the portion that is for level services. Salaries is in blue again, benefits is also in orange again, and revenues are in yellow on the right there. In gray, that little sliver is the net total of changes related to inflation or contractual increases. So with that context as a starting point for all the budget scenarios, the budget that staff developed according to council direction of some catch-up with an emphasis on municipal infrastructure would result in a tax rate increase projected to be 8.7%. The budget I'm proposing would also add some to the Safe, Healthy, Connected People Master Plan goal area and would result in a projected tax rate increase of 12.76%. The reason I went further than council direction is because of the context of a very unusual year, which is that the Winooski School District Superintendent has proposed to the school board to keep the same tax rate for them for this year as last year, or for FY25 as this current year. More on that later. I do realize 12.76% on the municipal side is unprecedented in recent memory, and that we are a relatively low-income community with affordability concerns. I propose it because there may not be a better opportunity to catch up on municipal underinvestment when it will be felt less by taxpayers. But staff did also prepare an alternative budget that's a bit lower of an increase at 10.454%. And this is a little bit different from the figure I gave in advance to council, and I'll explain why in a bit. This alternative has a more limited catch-up on safe, healthy, connected people. Now I'll talk a bit more detail about these three general fund budget scenarios. So first, starting with the council-directed budget. What is included in it is shown in this and then the three following slides. Those aspects that are for level services are supplies increased in line with increased costs for supplies. That's been level funded in the past. Folks duct taping chairs together. Technology services increased based on the recommended computer replacement schedule. Increase in telephone bills for the same services, unfortunately. Contracted groundskeeping services to make up for staff vacancies. Increased portalet service needs at 2 parks that we experienced this year and expect to continue. Increase in newsletter expense. Continue paying for enough seasonal pool coverage. Continued incremental increase, as we just heard with the town meeting TV presentation, and as well to Winooski Valley Parks District. More on that later. Oh, I guess that's all. So a note that the O'Brien Community Center is not included in this budget because we anticipate transferring ownership to the Champlain Housing Trust by July 1, 2024. We will have the same expenses, though, to lease the library and office spaces we needed that we use in the building now. We're not proposing to move our offices there or the library. It's just that the way that expense is categorized will be a little bit different. Okay, that's missing a little bit of that top there. So at the top it says what is included in the council-directed budget. So the practice for many years has been to increase the capital improvement fund by 5% per year. This has not been enough to keep up with capital needs. This year in particular, it would be chewed up by a couple of high dollar needs such that we would not even be able to keep our usual street resurfacing budget or our fleet replacement plan. So the increase in the council-directed budget to the capital improvement fund contribution is 22.67% this year. That would pay for necessary boiler replacement at Public Works facility. That's a level service, of course. It's a boiler we currently have. Burlington-Winooski Bridge replacement match for fiscal year 2025 work. That's level service, given that it's a bridge that we currently have. 2 traffic calming studies, which you might think of as a catch-up. Enterprise password manager to enhance cybersecurity. That's also a catch-up item. 2 planned vehicle replacements as was scheduled. That's level services. Again, that's current vehicles that we have. The typical street resurfacing budget, I'll explain why that's bolded in a minute. That's also level service. Riverwalk capital needs assessment. That's catch up and is the necessary first step so we can plan on when to replace components of that walkway along the river and snow and ice control brine maker equipment. This is an investment. This isn't something we're doing now or necessarily even catch up, but it will limit salt runoff, save money, protect water quality, and comply with upcoming water quality regulations and enhance driving safety. And it's actually expected to pay for itself in short order, so that's why it's on this list. And note that we will need even more of an increase in future years to meet more capital needs. John Rauscher will review that in more detail during your January 16th meeting. So our capital plan for, oh, I had a nice picture there, that's no longer there, oh well. Our capital plan for FY25 also includes investments that use capital reserves and so actually have no impact on the tax rate, but is part of how we are strategically and cost-effectively advancing council goals for municipal infrastructure. So those include a mower replacement, sidewalk and curb work for fiscal year 23 paving with unused bond proceeds requiring a bond vote. I'll review that in a minute. The pre-wet brine tanking controls associated with that brine making equipment I mentioned in the last slide. Traffic calming construction reserve funds, so that once we have studies, eventually we'll have enough money to actually do the traffic calming. Main and Weaver Street Bridge structural evaluations. Police Department architectural renovation conceptual plan and estimate. So you can tell that some of these are going to require more money later, but you got to do the first step of the studies first. What is included in the council directed budget is not catch up on all municipal infrastructure needs. A budget that truly cut up on historical underinvestment in streets and sidewalks alone would require an estimated 5 to 6 million to catch up, 5 to 6, not 56, to catch up, and an estimated $350,000 in annual maintenance thereafter. And there, again, as I mentioned, there's other types of underfunded municipal infrastructure needs, but streets and sidewalks is probably the one that we hear about most often, so bring these numbers to your attention. So whereas a 22.67% increase in contribution to the capital improvement fund over fiscal year 2024 might seem like a big increase compared to the typical 5%, a smaller increase just kicks the can down the road, meaning that what we need to pay for doesn't change. What it will cost, though, will likely increase. Not really to do with the general fund, except as other financial context for the general fund budget vote that voters will see in March. Note that we will be asking voters for the local match on the Burlington-Winooski Bridge project. The bond would be needed in fiscal year 2026. The amount of the bond will likely be 5% of the total project cost. The most recent state estimate of that total project cost is $60,518,000. 5% of that would be $3,025,900. We are still working on making the case for the 2.5%, as the mayor alluded to, with, of course, the mayor's advocacy. We also need that authorization to use excess bond proceeds that was from the completed Hickok Street project from a few years ago, to reallocate that for sidewalk and curb work elsewhere. It's a procedural thing we have to check off according to the bond bank in order to be able to use that money, which is allocated for that. And we can't really use it for anything else, except other sidewalk and curb work would be fine, as long as it was voted on. Does anyone want to ask any questions about what I presented so far about the council directed budget before I go into my proposed?
I'm assuming like things like the newsletter costs you said were going up. Have we pursued looking at different printers for that and things of that nature to try to reduce those costs?
I don't know if, Paul, I'm going to ask you to respond to the different printers question, but the one thing we have done is we proposed to reduce the page count, which we're actually going to try to do this year. That's part of it. It's grown over the years, and maybe it's actually harder to read now because it's longer, so we have talked about that. But this is actually based on the reduced page count and then including what their cost increase estimate is for its fiscal year 2025. Paul, can you speak to other printers? They are Winooski based, so sometimes that means it's going to be cheaper than someone else.
Yeah, that's really it, Elaine. Then thanks for the question, Councilor Renner. there used to be 2 printers in Winooski, which is actually amazing. So Repro is sort of the only game in town. They're the current printer that we're using. We have not looked into other local printers. In my limited experience, I would say the costs are likely going to be pretty similar. But yeah, it's certainly something we can look into.
This is something that we have a little bit of limited control over, as this is actually the school's vendor. We can work with the school, but our cost is a reimbursement to the school district.
Thank you, Angela.
Elaine, perhaps now is not the time to get into it, but I just have to say that it is very surprising to me that the council-directed budget catching up in municipal infrastructure does not actually increase annual paving and sidewalk maintenance. That is the thing that we hear. We saw that in the presentation earlier today. So I hope in a future discussion to hear more about the rationale for what was selected.
Sure. Now I'm realizing I can't take notes when I'm sharing my presentation. Angela, can you make sure that you take some notes about what's being raised here? Jane, do you have another pen? Could you get me another pen? Thanks. Anything else? All right, so what is included in my proposed budget? Which again, that adds some to safe, healthy, connected people for level services or catch-up. So it would be all items for council-directed budget from the council-directed budget, an increase in professional services budget for equity-related work, which I'd call catch-up, staff, including restoring the 16th police officer, which would be level service, because the police department was at 16 officers for 20 years. There was a year at 15 during the recession of 2008 and 2009. And then just in the last couple of years because of the spike in inflation last year. So we've had now a couple of years of data to show that 15 positions means that we're often actually at 11 to 12 officers between required and best practice training time, sick leave, and vacation, and say a vacancy. That requires either overtime or just one officer working. Meanwhile, community-oriented and trauma-informed policing takes time. Meeting the community by supporting block parties, hosting coffee with a cop, taking the time to be with a victim or source of a call to understand their situation, make them feel heard, and explain the broader context. That all takes time. Proactive policing for crime deterrence, such as directed patrols of crime-related hotspots, traffic enforcement, community officer collaboration, like with neighborhood watches, and overall police officer visibility. That all takes time. Writing reports takes time. When we're often at 11 or 12 officers on in a week, they are doing a lot of overtime. We're a busy city for police calls, so these are hard shifts. Our uniformed officers are professionals and care about this community, but you can imagine it is hard to bring the patience and compassion to every minute of every call when you're overworked. Note, too, that a vacancy is often a 2-year problem. That is, in the current environment, it's hard. It can take us 2 years to find an officer that is the right fit for Winooski, then get them trained up at the police academy on their twice-a-year academy schedule, and then field trained. That's why I'm proposing to restore funding for a 16th police officer. As council, and then fire captain for evening coverage at full time. That's level service in this context. So as council has heard over the years, we have a harder and harder time recruiting for and training part-time firefighters who live within acceptable response time distance and will respond between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. We have good coverage during the day because we have full-time code enforcement staff who are also certified firefighters and help lead the fire department. Now, you might be thinking, what about mutual aid for those late hours where neighboring fire departments respond to each other's calls? Winooski does benefit from mutual aid, like all small communities who can't afford firefighters paid 24 hours a day and 7 days a week, but it's really only used for major events. We did trial automatic 24/7 aid from St. Michael's Fire and Rescue for all calls, but it was found not to be sustainable or doable for 100% of the calls. Also, our community is unique in its demographics and buildings, and it's better if we have a Winooski trained firefighter as part of or even leading every fire call. And we are at the point where we are not able to do that 100% of the time. Obviously, one evening fire captain does not guarantee coverage for the whole 12 hours we don't currently have full-time staff, especially given that we'd want them to have some overlap with our current full-timers. It will, though, provide coverage for some of those hours, and with overlap with current full-time staff, it improves operational continuity into the evening, meaning knowing events and concerns from earlier in the day that often bleed over. There is a multiplier effect of this position as well. It will focus on training, a task that currently falls on either the full-time code team, reducing their time for proactive fire prevention and housing quality enforcement and education, or that duty falls on part-time fire officers who don't necessarily have the bandwidth to devote to training given their paid full-time job outside of the firehouse. Having a full-time position devoted to training means we will have the ability to better support our important on-call staff. Another one would be the second part-time library circulation assistant. It's in because without it, we had to close the library sometimes this year or pull community services staff to do coverage. More details on this will be in the community services presentation. I'm calling it catch-up here because it was ESSER funded before, so it hasn't been in the budget before, but we are also seeing an increase in usage of the library. The Senior Center Director, missed that one. The Senior Center Director to full-time is to provide more programming, not just for seniors, but also adults, an audience we don't serve much now. Winooski is the only member of the Winooski Valley Parks District that doesn't pay the full invoiced amount. Several years ago, the justification for paying less was because we were the only community that they didn't maintain a park in. As we've previewed before, staff would like them to take over management of Memorial Park to improve access and for other goals, and Councilor Hurd mentioned that earlier. My proposed budget includes the full amount of the contribution they would like Winooski to make by their formula. Ideally, you would make this decision about this transfer in time for your approved budget to match it. So if you have questions about this proposed transfer, please let us know today or by email after today. And we'll discuss the topic more during the community services presentation next week. Winooski Valley Parks District will also be in attendance and presenting to you at that meeting. So if we get your question before December 11th, it will that should allow us to address your questions then. And finally, historically, the rental registry and public building fees collected have been maintained and operated as a special fund that is not part of the general fund. Any budget shortfall is then paid for by a general fund reserve balance transfer. This has two consequences. First, the true cost of the program isn't obvious, and we can't always count on having a fund balance to subsidize it with. Second, staff can feel pressure to generate enough in fees to cover the rental registry and public building programs expenses by 100%. This can lead staff to feel the pressure to develop a quantity of versus quality of annual inspections, but many factors each year affect the ability of staff to meet revenue targets, and many of these factors are outside of their control. Whereas, as we've all heard, the rental registry services are essential to the health and safety of renters and users of public buildings generally, and have contributed to reducing our structure of fire calls. Including this budget in the general fund reflects that criticality of services, which is why I'm including it here. Now, with this whole list, hopefully it's obvious, but if not, note that each of these items have equity benefits. If you have questions about these recommendations, please let us know sooner rather than later so that we can address them during the departmental presentations. Please hold on to them just for now until I present the alternative budget, as some of your questions might be answered in that one. Before I go on to the alternative budget, I do realize I'm proposing a very large tax rate increase. However, keep in mind that people's property tax bills include both their share of the education as well as municipal taxes. In years past, I'd argue that city councils were too aware of the combined impact, with the result that city operations have been underfunded. Encourage future councils to more strategically maintain city services. But for this year, let's look one more time at the combined impact, because again, the school superintendent has proposed a level tax rate to the school board. The school board will be deciding on the budget they will propose to voters before the city council does, so you will know what the combined projected impact will be before you have to decide on your budget. So in the meantime, please keep an open mind. With that in mind, one way to think about what we're proposing taxpayers take on in fiscal year 2025 is what their tax rate might have been if recent trends had continued. So this graph shows in solid lines what the trend has been in the tax rate increases over the last 4 years for taxpayers who live in their Winooski home. The orange line in the middle is the education tax rate for taxpayers living in their Winooski home, known as the homestead rate. The blue line on the bottom is the city's tax rate, and the gray line at the top is the total tax rate. 4 years is the period over which the school board was ramping up their tax rate in preparation for debt service for the school construction to catch up on decades of underfunding that facility. The dotted lines continue those trends into the future. No, not that they would have, but I'm arguing to continue this trend of catching up on underfunding, this time on the city's side. The chart on the right shows the corresponding numbers for those lines. If the trend in the education and city tax rates continued, the combined total tax rate increase would have been about 15 cents per $1,000 of property value. If the whole of that increase went to the city, then our tax rate increase would already be 11.63%, and I'm proposing 12.76%. Now, the reason the school district can consider a level tax rate for fiscal year 2025 is because the state changed the education funding formula to finally catch up on the higher cost of educating Winooski school children compared to many other communities. That funding is supposed to be ongoing, but of course that amount of change is not. So this is a very unusual year, which I'd argue presents an unusual opportunity for the municipal budget. Therefore, I recommend City Council and this community take this opportunity to catch up on the municipal budget also, at least to fund level services. This opportunity is why I went further than Council's direction from October. I learned about the school district budget since that council meeting. For the expenses I'm proposing, especially the most expensive, which are full-time staff, if we don't do it this year, it might be harder to do it in future years, especially given the news on Friday about the projected statewide average increase to education and tax rates. There is likely to be pressure during the upcoming legislative session to revisit the statewide funding formula that is benefiting Winooski schools this year and is supposed to, it was hopefully going to continue. So to look at the numbers on my proposed budget from the roll-up perspective at the highest level, my budget constitutes an increase of over $2 million over last year, although the budget is increasing by over $2 million. Remember, this includes expenses formerly shown in the tax increment financing district fund or grand list growth. So the tax rate change, again, is 12.76%. About $1,030,521 of that expense increase, which is about 51.1% of the overall expense increase, about that much is being covered by the revenue from the expiring TIF district. Returning members of council will recall that an additional $409,000 in TIF revenues is covering expenses approved for inclusion in this year's budget that were covered by one-time funds in anticipation of the TIF revenue coming into the general fund in fiscal year 2025. The change in the average quarterly tax bill that's at the bottom, that is on a home assessed at $225,000, would be $89.85 or $359.39 for the year. So you're seeing this detail to see the most impactful of the three scenarios. We do have this detail available for the other scenarios if you'd like to see them. So again, I do realize 12.76% is still a high increase compared to last year's 5.22% increase and the 2.17 average increase in the 10 years before that. So staff have prepared an alternative budget for council consideration. with more limited funding and safe, healthy, connected people compared to my proposed budget. That comes in at a 10.54% increase. I want to emphasize that I don't actually recommend this budget scenario, but if council decides that 12.76 is just too much compared to what might have been an 11.63% tax rate increase, this is where staff would would suggest reducing. So there are sort of track changes in there, but I will highlight them as we go. So there is a source known as a COPS grant that could subsidize the 16th police officer position. However, it's very competitive, more competitive than I realized when I first put these numbers together. So we might not get it, and therefore we wouldn't get the 16th officer, obviously. The reason we're suggesting it, though, is that if we did get it, it would allow us the expense to be phased in over 3 years, which is always beneficial. The next change, this is what's changed the number from what I provided in advance to what you're seeing right now, is there isn't really a suitable fallback position from a full-time fire captain, because managing a part-time staff is actually potentially going to cost the full-time staff more. So I don't see a good alternative to this. And then weighing the two full-time positions, if I had to weigh those two public safety positions as full-time compared to this, the senior center director full-time position, I'd have to rank the other two as higher. And so that would be a reduction, is to keep the senior center director as part-time. And the last change is from proposed would be to keep the Winooski Valley Parks District at an incremental increase. So if we did transfer stewardship of Memorial Park to them, this is the most justifiable year to go to full payment. And again, it will be the year that jump is least felt by taxpayers. Note that the finance director has again prepared the budget scenario tool so that you can see these and their impact on these options and their impact on the tax rate in real time in a future meeting, or you can play with the tool yourself out of meetings. And again, although my proposed and even alternative budgets go further than council's direction, I do strongly recommend that council consider my proposed budget so as to fund for level services or catch up in an unusual year where the school district tax rate change is anticipated to be small or even none. So before I move on to the review of all the funds and presenting the general government budgets, I'll pause for questions. Again, if you have detailed questions about the scenarios, we might not answer them today, but we'll incorporate the answers into the departmental presentations. And if you think of any more questions at any time, feel free to ask for a meeting with Angela or me, the finance director, or send them to budget@winooskivt.gov. Do you have questions at this point?
I'll just say that similar to my question about the infrastructure rationale, I'll be looking for rationale for each of these additional recommendations in the relevant budgets coming forward later. Brandon, I see your hand.
So I think FY25, we're anticipating the school resource officer to be discontinued. So how is that being reflected in the budget?
Consultation with we've asked the Winooski School District what their plans are. They're not planning on changing the amount of money that they compensate the city for that service. The service will change from the school resource officer title, which is expected to be on site pretty much all the time, to a based off-site district liaison officer model, but provide a lot of the same services, just not on the school on unplanned time. So there would be planned activities such as, doing a specific classroom presentation or spending time with the safety committee, helping train up the new, what do they call it, CCS, community safety officer, something like that. Somebody that's based at the school that's not, a law enforcement person. So those services would continue. So they are not changing the amount of money that they're going to pay the city for those services. They just wouldn't be based there with unstructured time.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Can I add something tied on to that? does that in a way bring another officer into, or more officer time into the police force? So instead of adding a position, will there be more time from the school resource officer because they will not be fully based on campus?
We're not expecting that because of the volume of work that they're still expected to do, especially in fiscal year 2025 when they'll be having to figure out what the new school-based position will be doing. But it's an open discussion for future years.
So I guess that's a concern with this potential grant, if that then commits us to having a full-time officer further down the line, but then we might have this freed up from the school.
Well, I'll tell you that by some of the math that I've shown you in years past, which will show up again in the police budget presentation, the number that we would ideally have is between 16 and 17 officers. So I would not consider that to be excess capacity. It would be about what we need based on the coverage that we need.
And the SRO position is currently counted as one of our 16 officers.
Following up on that almost, and maybe this is just to ask when the chief is here, but would adding that 16th officer kind of pay for itself by offsetting the overtime that has been, that we're using currently to cover that position, or would there still be a significant amount of overtime?
Currently, we're not expected to exceed the overall police department budget due to overtime, so I'm not sure if I could answer that question though. Angela, do you have that?
The 16th officer would not offset the overtime because the overtime is currently being offset by the savings in vacancy and benefits.
Okay.
Thanks, Angela.
And I think just to echo what the mayor said, and, you know, just rereading this, you know, I think, you know, it says council direction was not to catch up on all municipal infrastructure needs, and that's for sure. We know we don't have close to the money to do that. Can't tax people that much ever, probably. But I do think, at least I left that meeting really feeling that our main desire was to catch up on the 4 to 5 million estimate that we need for roads and sidewalks. So I think to see, you know, proposed double-digit tax increases that aren't actually playing into that, I'm not opposed to talking about catching up other areas as well. But it doesn't seem that the catch-up that we actually wanted is reflected in the 3 budget options. Maybe I'm seeing that incorrectly, but I do think that's what we were talking about.
Okay, we can discuss that more. Anything else?
One thing I will say, I was the one vote for Safe, Healthy, Connected instead of municipal infrastructure, and I will say the items I was most concerned about was our fire coverage and our library coverage, so I do appreciate those being included in what the city manager is proposing, because those are just such high areas of need that I see in our community, that I just, it's hard to continue to fully, I think, give the services. That's why I see them. I agree that they would be catch-up or level service because they're so needed right now.
Other questions from attendees, perhaps? Comments? Anyone on Zoom? Okay.
Thanks. Now, while biggest, the general fund is just one of 6 funds. The following slides review the bigger picture of all the funds. The overall budget for fiscal year 2025 as proposed is actually down because we'll be done with the TIF debt service. And this slide shows the expenses across all the city's service areas under my proposed budget. Notice that as is appropriate, Public Works and Capital together are the biggest share. That's because municipal infrastructure, that includes buildings, water lines, and sewer treatment, roads, sidewalks, and equipment for all that is expensive. The good news in terms of overall impact on residents, the water fund and wastewater fund rate increases needed to cover expenses are much lower than last year's increases. Those were 18.6% for water and 10.5% for wastewater. Thanks to staff planning and council foresight, we have been able to catch up on our previously unfunded liabilities, enough so that we are proposing a bit more than needed to cover expenses, so we can build more capacity, including for Main Street revitalization debt coming online in 2027. So we're proposing a 5% increase to both rates. That would increase the typical family household water cost by $22.88 and wastewater cost by $27.88 compared to this fiscal year. As noted previously, staff recommend the rental registry budget be moved into the general fund, so I'm not reviewing those details here. As for what's next, we'll go into various departments. Tonight will be the General Administration Department. Next week is Community Services. Keep in mind that there will be a few final votes required of council, including the general fund budget and approval of the warning for town meeting day. That will include 2 bond votes, as I mentioned earlier, the Burlington-Winooski Bridge Match, the authorization to use unspent bond proceeds from the completed Hickok Street project for sidewalk and curb work elsewhere, to approve the individual enterprise and special revenue funds for fiscal year 2025, and then approve the fee and rate resolutions. So that was the end of my budget overview presentation. Before I go on to general administration budget, would you like to take a break? Power through?
Let's power through.
Okay.
If I could make one comment before you get into that, though.
Sure.
So what is being proposed is for the average tax bill, $360 for the year increase, plus another $50 on the utility side. So just as a frame of reference, my home is assessed below the average value in Winooski, and the city side has increased $424 in the last 5 years. The whole bill has gone up $1,720. I would be interested in seeing like an actual average bill history, tax history in Winooski, so we can, like, as a point of reference as what this bump will feel like to somebody compared to what they've been experiencing.
What do you mean by an actual average?
I don't know if you can acquire this, but we know what the average is for the municipal side. Do we know what the average is on the education side? If we had the average Winooski household, average house assessment, average income, whatever.
Sorry, did you, I started to assume that you were gonna say school district and then realized I'd stopped. I did.
That's
it.
what
Oh,
I
you
was.
did. Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
that is what I meant.
Okay. Yeah, I think the school district prepares that. Angela, I think you're trying to get in.
Yeah, so I can tell you the amount that we bill each person, but the impact on the household is a little more difficult because of the state payment that could come in based on income. And the amount people are paying for housing compared to that income. That's a little harder to pinpoint because the average income may not be reflected by the person who owns the same like average home value.
Fair. I think seeing what's average billed is still a useful exercise.
That's easy enough. I can absolutely do that.
Great. Anything else? Okay.
Oh, Bryn's got her hand up.
Oh, sorry.
Bryn's hand is up.
I just want to make note that the majority of workers are not part of our union and do not get the benefits of COLA. And just to really keep that in mind, as you know, the city's expenses continue to increase, but people's salaries don't necessarily continue to increase in line with what we are seeing at the city level. So, you know, as we see like those other expenses that are uncontrollables, negotiated, salaries and benefits. Like, it's not, you know, we see these proposed estimates of, you know, 9 to closer to 13%. And, you know, people's salaries just are not increasing with inflation and increasing with COLA. So just to kind of keep that in check as we continue to consider what's reasonable for our tax base.
Now we'll spend a few slides reviewing the general government budgets as they appear in my proposed budget. So these are the staff considered part of general government departments. On the left, under administration department, we have the city clerk's office, which maintains official records, holds elections, takes payments, and manages certain licenses and permits. On the right, the other parts of the administration department provide support to all city departments, including financial management. That doesn't make sense. Sorry, I'm still on the left. Including financial management, staff recruitment and retention, and communications with the community. Other departments that fall under the heading of general government on the right are planning and zoning, which plans for and administers the growth and development of the city through long-range planning and regulatory review to ensure land development is consistent with adopted goals and objectives. There are no proposed changes to that budget. The purpose of the Housing Office is to develop and implement initiatives that support a mix of quality housing that maintains and enhances Winooski's unique sense of place and supports the needs of the entire community. The Parking Office supports the supply of publicly accessible parking for economic vitality while managing for safety. Although the Parking Fund is situated with the Public Works Department for budgetary oversight, parking is jointly managed by a cross-departmental team because it touches several areas. The code enforcement officer positions that mostly enforce parking are supervised by the police department.
Elaine,
Yes.
there's 3 parking positions?
1 full-time and 2 part-time that are unfilled.
Okay.
General administration is mostly services, so the budget is largely related to people, either in staff or professional services, as in contracted services. This is the roll-up view of the general fund administration budget. Last fiscal year, do you see the bottom? Yes. Current fiscal year and the recommended next fiscal year on the right. And the fiscal year 2025 general administration city manager's proposed budget includes these items. I've actually mentioned most of these not that long ago now, so I'll just add here that most of the increase in the professional services line is due to increasing computer replacement costs. Also, the legal fees increase isn't really extra since it was previously in the tax increment finance district fund, and both the expenses and revenues from that fund will be part of the general fund starting in fiscal year 2025. Are there any questions about the general administration items? Okay. So that was the end of the general government presentation. Now I'll take a quick march through the couple funds that I manage. Other funds. The Community Development Fund pays for parts of several staff and staff training who advance community development. It has a, it has a healthy balance. My proposed general fund budget continues the contribution into this fund so that we have dedicated ongoing funding for community development efforts. It's a continuation because the source of that contribution used to be the tax increment finance district budget. Now onto the parking,
I'm sorry, I didn't track that. Are we're retaining the 200,000, or are you saying that we're adding more into that?
It was previously contributed by the TIF district, and that it's the same amount is now coming out of the general fund.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
Sure thing. What's happening? Parking fund. Okay. So now onto the parking fund. We did used to have 2 parking departments, one for on-street parking and one for the Cascades Garage. Going forward with the Abenaki Garage now underway, we'll be combining them all into one fund so that they can subsidize each other. So we're projecting that the on-street parking fund portion will continue to recover from the pandemic this year and make more money than it expends, although we still have a fund deficit. Next year, we're expecting to contribute much less to reducing this deficit, but still contribute. The Abenaki Garage is anticipated to begin operation during fiscal year 2025. However, it's not likely to be able to fund its own operations until a future year and is anticipated to be subsidized by the Cascades Garage or on-street operations for several years. And this is something that we'd anticipated when we were looking at financing. The existing garage has been managed well and had the advantage of using a TIF district to finance its construction. So it has a strong fund balance. So that's what's helping us with the Abenaki Garage. Almost at the end. So there are a couple items that have the potential to impact the city's financial picture, at least a couple. The two I want to review here are the city plans to sell the Bryan Community Center to Champlain Housing Trust. I mentioned that already, as you all know. What our rent will be for our library and community services offices actually will depend on how much upfront money the partners are able to raise. So we'll see how that goes. For regional dispatch, with the passage of Vermont House Bill 494 in the last legislative session, the funding and momentum for regional dispatch has paused, which pauses the Chittenden County Public Safety Authority, or CCPSA, effort for regional dispatch in this county. CCPSA has not yet decided what they will do in fiscal year 2025. Staff and I are discussing adjustments this year to help issues that regional dispatch is supposed to address. It's a bit early to talk about these just yet, which is why I have not changed that allocation for fiscal year 2025 in my proposed budget.
Can I ask, probably cover it later, but just to flag, we put, I guess, money that didn't go into funding, we also put aside that police position, the administrative police position. What are we doing with that money?
That I'm thinking of it all as together. So when I have something more concrete I can say about that, I will definitely update council.
Okay. Because I think what's important to me is in some cases we've already paid money. So there's money that we, like a sunk cost, and there's money that we haven't paid into that pot. And it feels important to kind of separate those two things.
What do you mean by sunk cost? There's money being held there that we could get back if it fails altogether or just decides to dissolve.
So that's helpful to know too, like what is being, I guess that's what I mean. What is currently being held already and what is money that we set aside for, say, this position that maybe we could put towards funding other positions? We already budgeted for this position.
Right, so regional dispatch was supposed to help with some specific issues that are ongoing.
Yes.
So that's what I'm looking to that money to do, is it's serving the same function as, we're trying to get close to the same function that regional dispatch was supposed to address.
Okay. I just think.
Still working on them.
Yeah. Yeah. I just feel like this, at least for me, was a very important thing last year, was we were seeing it kind of fail and now it's paused. So I want to, and I know there are issues. There are issues for both our fire and police. So yeah.
Right.
I just want to make sure we are putting money in a way that most actually really helps.
Yes, absolutely.
And not as just some future thing.
Yes, absolutely. Trying. So, this is basically my last slide. We're at the end of my presentation on the budget. Thank you for putting so much time to review so much material, and to the leadership team for preparing so much material and managing resources responsibly and serving our community. And of course, missing the last line there, but thanks again, as always, to Angela Aldirai, without whom all of us would have a much harder time managing the city. Are there any more questions for tonight? And remember to send any between meetings to budget at winooskivt.gov. That goes for the public at large and for council.
I guess one question that I have, and this relates to your budget, Elaine. Do you have ideas of what those professional service budget for equity related work, what that would kind of look like, or is that something that?
Yeah, so it's very tricky to be proposing money for money that I haven't spent yet this year. I am anticipating spending it, but we don't have a dedicated language access line, so that's always a possibility. There's certainly always training that we could be paying for, certainly other consulting services we might pay for.
Okay.
But I'm anticipating having more to say about that in the next few months.
Okay.
Any final questions? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine.
Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Angela. And the rest of the team. Bryn?
Yeah, I have a comment. I know we've been talking, I know staff and Safe Healthy Connected have been talking about the transfer of property to Winooski Valley Parks District, and we've gone over some various reasons as to why that may be beneficial. I am reluctant. I continue to be reluctant on that. One, it locks us into an agreement that with the Winooski Valley Parks District that we don't have any control over their increasing requests for cost coverage. Whereas right now we have more ability. It's our property. We have more ability to say what investments we want to make at this time and year over year over time. So I'm just really reluctant to agree to making that at this time, and looking at the other opportunities we have that are higher priority. So I just wanted to make note of that early on.
Thanks, Bryn. I'm going to email all this to you anyway, but related, when we do get a presentation from them, I would want to know how we're paying less because they don't manage any land here. But even if they do manage Memorial Park, how does that compare to acreage managed services provided, et cetera, across communities? Or are we just paying a random flat fee that everyone pays?
I feel like I definitely appreciate the partners that we have that really take Winooski's unique situation into account, like town meeting TV.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I
Yeah.
hope other partners do the same.
Yeah, I just think I'd like to see exactly what we're going to be getting out of that and what benefit there will be, and hopefully an added benefit. You know, like perfect example is town meeting TV covering more Winooski events than they have to. I'd like to see something like that if it's something we're going to do.
Noted.
Okay. Well, let's move on to item I then, the strategic vision goal area updates.
Okay, given that you've been listening to me a lot today, I actually didn't prepare any remarks, but I'm happy to answer any questions about the goal updates for all, the associated equity update, and economic vitality.
The staffing audit, is that something that is going to be present in the budget presentations, or is that work not at that place yet?
We've just drafted a request for proposals for a firm to do that, so it just depends on how quickly that can move.
There.
Bryn, go ahead.
Related to the sidewalk use, given we had some additional comments earlier, in the agenda, obviously it's a little too soon to be asking staff to respond, but I feel like council was told not that long ago that 2 million was fairly standard, and now we're hearing, at least from one business person, that it's not. So it is difficult to I don't know, make sense of those two juxtaposed positions.
The 2 million for, I can't think of anywhere in Burlington that's really comparable to our roundabout. So I don't know if 2 million is standard generally. I don't know that. But what I can say is that the city's insurer, which insures most cities and towns in Vermont, looked at our situation, and that was the number that they recommended, given the current situation, the current configurations. So what the business owner was saying about the issues in Burlington, those are not what are driving that recommendation. It's really the traffic configuration that's driving that recommendation.
Can I tap, this might not, but kind of tied to that, are there things that came up in the bike ped master plan that might inform any of this? Because I know, what was it, they got number 6, at least for a scoping study.
Eric, any thoughts? He's squinting.
I would say not specifically.
Okay.
It may come up through something like a scoping study, but there was no specific comments that I can recall offhand.
Okay. Yeah, I was just interested if that's another resource we could pull from.
No other comments on this last item? I didn't see anything surprising in there, so good news. Okay, that is the end of this evening's agenda. Shockingly. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Thomas, second by Charlie. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you all.
Thank you.